The next book that I would like to review for you guys is the first in a trilogy of books that tell the history of World War II. Except it's not just the history of World War II, it's more about the German side. And this actually, the first volume of which, this is a review of just the first volume of the trilogy, tells the story from, say, Wilhelmine, Germany, through right up through the beginning of when Hitler takes power. It might take us, I don't think it takes us up through 1939, but it takes us up through January of 1933, which is when Hitler actually takes control. This book is by Richard J. Evans's trilogy, the first volume of which is called The Coming of the Third Reich. It's quite a long book. It's with bibliography and index and everything, it runs well over 600 pages. I have the second and the third volumes. They're even longer, which is one of the reasons that have put me off. I don't want to get halfway through a long book and then not be able to finish it and review it for you. But this book was really quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. And if you feel that perhaps some of the things that make Nazi Germany a real possible thing in history, because it seems so absurdly improbable, that anything like, I mean, if it hadn't been true, you would think it was fiction, right? This is a great book to start. Of course, there are many out there, but it starts to explain to you the historical contexts that would allow for something like this to happen. Richard Evans, who, by the way, is the Regius Professor of Modern History at Oxford, cites some fascinating numbers in the introductory book of his trilogy on the rise and fall of Nazi power in Germany. Some interesting numbers about the number of books about this subject. The continued output of accounts of Germany's part in World War II has been pretty much nonstop since the middle of the last century, the 20th century. We can quibble over the technicalities of what might be meant by well understood history, but most historians would say that we more or less understand the dynamics of the breakdown of Weimar democracy and the rise of Nazism. Perhaps you're familiar with the much maligned, and rightly so, school of Holocaust denial, which would probably disagree with some of those conclusions, but I'm talking about mainstream history and historiography that's commonly accepted here. Some more speculative observers might even suggest that we could definitely account for the rise of a Hitlerian-like demagogue. Why then, Evans asks, why then the constant deluge of historical accounting and reaccounting of this arc of history that we pretty much know? Why must we keep telling ourselves about it? And this is a really interesting question. Evans suggests that aside from, and this is all in the introduction, this is not the body of the book, he suggests that aside from the consumption of World War II history as pulp, really with not much properly historical academic value turn on the History Channel, for example. Accounts of it are often riddled with the subjective moralizing of its authors, and is often a very good conduit for that subjective moralizing. For Evans, this tends to get in the way of the proper obeisance to history that all historians, academic historians, should pay. In a way, he also wrote the book for the mind-bogglingly stupid historian, quote-unquote, David Irving, who is one of the aforementioned Holocaust deniers, who claimed during a trial for libel that David Irving lost, by the way, that there was no general history of Nazi Germany that Irving himself could recommend. When he was asked by, I guess, the equivalent of a prosecutor or something during the trial, what general history of this period of German history could you recommend? He said, there isn't one. Basically saying that, they've all been so, biased by these pro-Holocaust thinking historians that I can't recommend one because they all believe the Holocaust happened. Which is, of course, not to say that a book of clear-minded history has never disabused a mindless ideologue like David Irving of his willful abuse of history, and really disgraceful rape of the public record, too. The scope of the book, as you might think, going from just the tail end of the 19th century up through the 1930s, like I said, I think it stops at 1933, is huge. It covers, of course, covering Wilhelmine Germany. It also covers pre-Weimar Germany. Look, I even noted here. See, that's what happens when you write your review right after you finish the book. You include details that you've forgotten since. Yeah, through the beginning of 1933. So it covers, about 15 years of Weimar, the culture, the art, the politics, the political opinions, society, all that good stuff. In the introductory chapter, Evans attempts to trace certain trends back to the end of the 19th century. While there's two generations of history doesn't sound like a tremendous amount, it makes for an awfully portentous reading when that history, despite its despite people constantly trying to revisit it, making it fresh and new. I mean, it's tough. In tackling so much, Richard Evans does a really good job in abbreviating, I guess, what you could call a German national character, even though that sort of sounds vaguely Nazi-esque. I'm sorry. I mean, what the German people were feeling, what they were emoting in common, their common biases, their common loves, their sense of self, their sense of place in Europe and in the world. While this volume does not cover the gas chambers or the labor camps that the Nazis built, because of course those were done after 1933, this is just up through the beginning of when Hitler takes power. The book does show the careful way in which the Nazis utterly destroyed, the few legal protections that the Weimar Republic had put in place for all of its citizens, including Jews. The Nazis then used their combined power of both the police state and the mass media and propaganda machines to destroy longtime political friendships and bonds that they built while destroying those freedoms. So they would build these, back in the 1920s, before people truly knew how evil the party was, what they would do is they would build coalitions with ideologically close parties, and then later, once they had achieved what they wanted to achieve, they would burn their bridges, and then they would go after those people. It's just mind-bogglingly sociopathic, and a fascinating history to read. Over time, social life in the public sphere consisted of fewer and fewer activities that were explicitly endorsed and affiliated by the National Socialist Party, or the Nazi Party. Evans also covers the complicated history of the Church's role, Protestant and Catholic, in sharing Nazi sympathies. It would be easy for a book like this to turn into simply a critical biography of Hitler's rise to power, but to its credit, it's so much more than that. It presents, in a word, a zeitgeist. Not necessarily the only one that could have been built up to World War II, but one that certainly allowed history to run the course that it did. Is there a lot of new ground unearthed here as far as information goes? No. Is it particularly brilliantly written or historically insightful? I didn't really find it to be either one. In fact, it highly resembles many other histories of the time period in subject matter, form, and tone. This doesn't, however, I think, distract it from its value as an authoritative and exhaustive historical account by an established scholar, not David Irving, with impeccable credentials, Regius Professor of Modern History at Oxford, who has made it his job to fight against the ideological bigotry and ignorance and hatred of this sort of willed historical blindness that you can see, and that just sort of like mosquitoes to a light bulb. Just crazy people. Just, they love to talk about World War II and Hitler. And if you ever want to find out how crazy someone truly is, get them to talk about what they think about Hitler. I've discovered the true nature of some people by having them say one too many things about World War II. Wow. But that's maybe for another video. This is the first volume of Richard J. Evans's trilogy on World War II. This is the coming of the Third Reich, mostly a history of Weimar Germany up through 1933.